Hello everybody, and welcome to Bread Garden Market number 4 of our Turofile Cheese Club. This will be the Cheeses of Spain edition. And as I mentioned in the wine videos for the other clubs this month, I am a huge fan of everything Spanish. So whatever the equivalent of Francophile is for Spain, and an Hispaniophile, a Spaniardphile, I have no idea, but I am certainly one of those. Everything from the people, the food, including the cheese, of course, but food is so fantastic in Spain. Wine, art, architecture, music, film. If it's Spanish, I'm kind of always automatically in. So there may be a little bit of bias in this video in terms of how much I love these cheeses and how much I talk about these cheeses and their greatness, but you'll excuse me, it comes from a place of deep affection and love. So talking a little bit as an introduction to Spanish cheeses, I guess in terms of production and consumption, the region, the country's cultural diversity is directly reflected in the types of cheeses they make. The different types of topography and climates directly affect the styles and types of cheeses. And while Spain doesn't produce as many cheeses as France, they do produce over 100 different, at least recognized cheeses. And so quite an array, quite diverse, depending upon where you are in Spain. They do make cow milk cheeses, goat milk cheeses, but really for Spain, it's the sheep milk cheeses that really stand out for me. I would argue that there's probably no country in the world that makes better sheep milk cheeses than Spain. A lot of that has to do with the tradition. They've been making sheep milk cheese since Roman times, as have a lot of other countries, but with Spain, there's just a little more something to it. Indeed, the most famous Spanish cheese, without question, I think, is Manchego, which is kind of probably also the most famous sheep cheese in the world. Spain is known for their sheep milk cheeses. They make excellent cow's milk cheeses. They make fantastic goat milk cheeses, but the Spanish are the king of sheep milk cheeses. In particular, we'll get into this a little later, but we're talking about where sheep milk cheese greatness is centered in Spain. You're talking about the high plains, kind of a little north of Madrid, kind of where Ribera del Duero, a famous wine region, is, which we covered in the wine clubs. And a little west of that, the topography is kind of very rugged. It's a lot like Utah, which kind of might explain why the conquistadors had such an affinity for the American West. A lot of conquistadors were from that area. And that is, of course, where Manchego is made. There's a region called La Mancha there. And then to the west of that and a little south, there's a very famous region in Spain. It's famous for a number of reasons, called Extremadura. And a lot of the other great Spanish cheeses come from there as well. La Serena, excuse me, and Torta del Cesar. And we'll get to try Torta del Cesar later, which is, it's one of my all-time favorites. So being so diverse, being so plentiful in cheese production, like Italy and like France and other countries we've covered, how do you go into covering and tasting cheeses of Spain? And do you try to cover as much as you can in one class? Do you just go through kind of the blue chip heavy hitters that are very famous throughout the world? And that's certainly a way to go. In this particular edition, I went a little bit different. I picked and ordered some not strange cheeses, but really unique cheeses, I guess. Cheeses you don't see here in the States very much. I placed an order for a lot of the cheeses we're going to taste here today that's in part of your Cheese Club package about 2 months ago. And there's a Torta del Cesar that I mentioned, but then there's 2 other cheeses from Finca Pasqualetti who I'll try talk about later from Extremadura. There's a really cool paprika coated sheep milk cheese that we're going to try. Delicious goat milk cheese. And then we do have a manchego, so the manchego is going to be the more popular, well-known cheese. But I doubt, except for maybe one exception, that anybody who's doing the cheese club with us has had any of the other 4 cheeses before that. So something really cool, something exciting. I was really glad that they arrived on time during the pandemic and COVID. Europe has kind of opened and shut down a number of times, and it's been really challenging. And obviously there's a lot bigger problems than this, but it has been challenging to get stuff imported from Spain, Italy, and France on the wine and the cheese side throughout this thing. And so the fact that they came even a week early is fantastic news. So that being said, before we get into the cheeses, let's talk a little bit about the history of cheese in Spain, and then kind of quickly go over where the best cheese regions are, and then we'll start tasting some of these delicious cheeses. So the history of Spanish cheese making dates back thousands of years. There's evidence that cheese was being made in Spain since at least the 4th millennium BCE. So predating Roman times and Roman occupation in Spain. Indeed, before the Romans got to Spain, certain regions of Spain were already known for their pressed, semi-hard sheep milk cheeses. So even back then, Spain was making fantastic sheep milk cheeses. And then during the Roman occupation, Rome occupied Spain for hundreds, I think, well, even maybe thousands of years. But cheese making increased. Cheese was always a very important part of Roman culture and Roman daily life. Most Romans sat down to cheese for breakfast, which is a tradition I fully support to this day. There are some things the Romans got very right. Their love for cheese was one of them. And then after the Roman occupation, cheese culture and expansion of cheese making was foremost, I kind of guess, carried on by the church, by the Catholic Church in particular. Cistercian and Benedictine monks and nuns actually were known for their cheese-making skills and cheese-making abilities. And that's not only in Spain, that's in most of Western Europe. After the nobility, the largest landowners in the various Catholic Christian states of medieval Europe was the church. And so the monks, the monasteries, and things like that, and convents had the land where they could raise animals and thus produce things like cheese. Cheese during times of fasting was very prevalent in the Catholic Church and in these monasteries. When the priests and monks and nuns couldn't eat meat during times of fasting and certain holidays, they would turn to other sources of protein, including cheese. Eating great cheese doesn't necessarily count to me as fasting necessarily, but that's what they did. And it certainly cheese was very prevalent in Christian diets, especially in monasteries and convents. And there are still cheeses that are made in Spain today, like cobreses, that were originated by, I think cobreses was actually originated by Cistercian nuns back in the Middle Ages. So as in most of Europe, the Catholic Church, in particular, various sects of monks and nuns, Cistercian and Benedictine in Spain in particular, played a huge part in growing Spanish cheese tradition. Spain was always and still is a very Catholic country, and had a number of shrines and holy places where people from all over Europe would make pilgrimages to throughout the Middle Ages as well. One very famous road in Spain, the Camino de Santiago, was a place where a lot of people from all over the world, but mostly Western Europe, would make pilgrimages to various sites throughout Spain in hopes of miracles or inspiration, or as part of religious obligation. But this influx of people also helped cheese making and cheese culture to grow in Spain. People bought, I talked a little bit about this in one of the wine videos. These roads, these famous religious roads that led to various pilgrimage sites, also brought with it transfer of information. So if you had French travelers going through the Camino de Santiago in Spain, or Italian travelers, they would share their knowledge, or bring their wines, bring their cheeses, share their knowledge with the people along the roads, and so you'd have this kind of fantastic sharing of information. Also, a lot of shepherds on that road in Camino de Santiago who would sell wool and cheeses as well. Again, the church playing a big role in the evolution and continuation of Spanish cheese making. Two other cultures that had a huge influence on Spanish cheese making and kind of the diversity of it and the growth of it were Jewish culture. Unfortunately, before they were expelled from Spain in the Middle Ages, Jewish culture played a huge part in Spanish cheese making. One area in particular was this idea, or the creation of, what we call thistle rennet cheeses. So I think of people say, vegetarians often ask, is this cheese vegetarian? And you think, well, why would a cheese not be vegetarian? And that has to do with the type of rennet used for the creation of cheese. So Jewish prohibition on mixing meat and milk, for a lot of historians, resulted in the creation of thistle cheeses. And so what are thistle cheeses? What are we talking about? Well, thistle is a plant. And thistle can be used when it's steeped like as a tea as a rennet. So it can cause coagulation. And coagulation is a separation of, so you're taking the liquid milk and you're separating the solid, the curd, from the liquid, the whey, and that's how you start your cheese making process. And going back a few sentences, you may ask, well, the Jewish prohibition of mixing meat and milk, what in cheese making are you doing that's mixing meat and milk? Well, most rennet traditionally, and still to this day, again, the enzymes that cause the cheese to separate, the solid protein, the curd to separate from the whey, enzymes cause a chemical process. The enzymes are what we're referring to here as rennet. And rennet is mostly occurs due to enzymes called chymosin, and pepsin. And chymosin and pepsin is found in the fourth stomach, the abomasum, of ruminant animals. So ruminant animals, we're talking about animals that have four stomachs. So your key cheese-making animals like cow and sheep and goat. Their fourth stomach, the abomasum, is loaded with chymosin and pepsin. And you want more chymosin than pepsin, and so younger animals tend to have more chymosin. So regardless, I'm going off on a tangent here. So that enzyme you need to cause coagulation to make cheese was harvested from an animal's stomach, the fourth stomach, the abomasum. So that rennet is technically meat, or comes from an animal, and is considered meat for vegetarians, and in Jewish tradition, as when you separate milk from meat, you can't use the enzymes from the stomach, that's meat. And so that was not permitted. So then how do you make cheese? Well, you can get this enzyme, chymosin and pepsin, from other areas or through other means. And one of the things that people discovered was that the thistle plant, and a specific part of the thistle plant, has loads of chymosin in it. And so if you steeped and made a tea out of the thistle, you make rennet, and instead of harvesting that enzyme from the stomach of the animal, you harvest it through thistle. Now, in places like Catalonia, Extremadura, which we're going to talk about quite a bit, even the Balearic Islands, in and around Mallorca, there are still a fair number of thistle rennet cheeses made. In fact, one of my favorite cheeses, which we're going to try, Torta del Caesar, is probably, along with La Serena, the most famous thistle rennet cheese in the world. Thistle rennet creates really interesting cheeses. The thistle plant itself and thistle tea can be very bitter and astringent. And sometimes when you use thistle rennet, you will get a little bit of that bitterness in the cheese. It'll kind of be apparent. But in well-made cheeses like Torta del Caesar, it adds a note of complexity instead of making a cheese like unpalatable or sour. So Jewish culture, according to a number of historians, created the thistle rennet, or was influential in creating thistle rennet cheeses. And then Islamic culture played a huge part in Spanish cheese culture as well, especially in southern and eastern Spain. For large swaths of the Middle Ages, Muslim people, Islamic people controlled. Spain was conquered by, southern Spain and eastern Spain in particular, were conquered by Muslims. And a lot of medieval cookbooks, recipes in the region during the time, so a lot of Islamic recipes included cheeses and recipes for cheeses and what cheeses to use for what types of cuisines and things like that. So not only did Christianity have a huge influence on the history of Spanish cheese, but Jewish culture and Islamic culture did as well. And then we discussed some of this in the wine classes. Spanish cheese culture kind of almost collapsed a little bit in the early part and middle part of the 20th century. We're kind of fast forwarding a bit here, but between World War I, the Depression, and then the Spanish Civil War, where Franco and the fascist government won the Civil War, took control, did a lot of damage to Spanish cheese culture for a number of reasons, which I won't get into as much here, but Spain was in large part isolated from a lot of the rest of the world until Franco died in the 70s. And then cheese has had an amazing renaissance in Spain over the last 40, 50 years, and has kind of reestablished itself as one of the great cheese-making countries of the world, just like it has done with wine, and has really done so much in such a short period of time to revitalize the reputation, and the cheese industry continues to grow. So while sheep milk cheese is what Spain is best known for, there are certainly plenty of cow's milk cheeses and goat's milk cheeses in Spain. And outside of Valencia, just about every region has a PDO cheese that they're known for. PDO just means protected designated origin of cheese. So PDO cheese would be like a Manchego from La Mancha, or Idiazabal from the Basque region in Navarra. So they're cheeses whose names are protected. They're kind of cultural landmarks, but similar in wine, like Rioja is a protected designated name in Spain for Spanish wine. And just like in France, you have like Bordeaux, and we've talked about AOCs and DO and DOC and DOCG, France and Spain and Italy. So the same concept here. But since the European Union, a lot of that has switched over to PDO, and so these cheeses are protected. Their names are protected. You really can't have Manchego that's made in America. You could have Manchego style-based cheeses, but so most areas in Spain, except like I said, except for Valencia, has PDO cheeses, and like in the north and northwestern part of Spain, in the Asturias, you have great cow milk cheeses, in particular, or cabrales, which is just killer blue cheese. I mentioned kind of further east, when you go to the Basque area, you have Idiazabal, which is a sheep milk cheese that is smoked, really, really delicious. In Aragon, you have Tronchon, which was a cheese that was beloved by Sancho from Cervantes' Don Quixote. Tronchon and Manchego are both mentioned at least a few times in Don Quixote. And in Murcia, which is in southern Spain, you have your famous, that's your drunken goat. They cure goat cheeses in wine. Even the islands, the Balearic Islands, Mallorca, well known for Mahon, and then Extremadura, of course, which is known for the La Serena and Torta del Cesar as well. Those are some of the best sheep milk cheeses in all of Spain, and those are also still to this day thistle rennet-based cheeses. So kind of cheese in almost every nook and cranny of Spain. So where do we begin? Again, we're not going to do, except for the Manchego, super well-known Spanish cheeses. We're not going to do kind of the blue chippers. We're skipping Mahon. We're skipping Idiazabal. We're skipping Campo de Montalban. These are all great cheeses, especially when you get real great small production, oftentimes raw milk examples of these cheeses, especially on the Mahon side. Mahon is, it's kind of become like a big commercial cheese and pre-packed and pre-made, but there are still some producers out there who are doing really cool stuff with raw milk Mahon. So in the same way Manchego has kind of become commercialized in a lot of ways, Mahon has as well, so is Campo de Montalban, but you can still find producers that are making kind of small production stuff that is really out of this world. But I kind of wanted to avoid a lot of that. Valdeón, which is a great Spanish blue cheese, but so instead of going in that direction and just trying to, what are the 4 or 5 most well-known cheeses in Spain, I just decided to go the opposite way. What are the hardest cheeses to get here in the States? We found this great little importer who does small production cheeses from Spain in different parts of the world, and just brought in a lot of their cheeses for this class because the cheeses are amazing. And so these are not like the blue chip Spanish cheeses. I've done a lot of those cheeses in other classes we've done when we used to do classes in the shop, which we'll get back to hopefully sooner rather than later. So instead I kind of swerved, I zagged on you a little bit, but I think it's going to be well appreciated, and you're going to really enjoy a lot of these cheeses. So with that, let's start getting into it. So our first cheese today is called Vega d'Arte. It's actually a goat milk cheese from Bierzo in Spain. It comes in cut it in half, but comes in kind of a log. A lot like and very similar to a boucheron or bouche de laquais in France. Kind of same cylindrical shape. And this is from an importer called the Rogers Collection. That's that small importer of fine cheeses from around the world, and in particular some really incredible cheeses out of Spain that we found pretty recently. And this is a cheese that the Rogers Collection actually orders from Joaquin Casado, who makes this cheese basically to order. So they take orders for this cheese from various clients from around the world. They put in an order, and he makes the cheese to order. And they're all made from Joaquin's own herd of Florida and Murciano goats. And you know, it is very similar to a Bouche de Luque. So it's an ash-ripened goat cheese. So you see kind of the ash here. So ash is a natural, it's a base. And goat cheese tends to be a little tangy in a really good way. But ash as a base kind of tempers down some of that acidic tanginess. So to use ash to make ash ripened goat cheese is a very common thing around the world. We're talking about Spain, we're talking about France, Italy, the US. Ash has always been used. And in ancient days, ash is used as a preservative as well. So some of that is part of the tradition. And you see it's kind of firm and almost cakey in the middle. And then around the edge, it's hard to see with my state-of-the-art camera, but around, this is called the creme line, it's starting to get a little softer. And as the cheese gets riper and a little older, that creme line will increase and get a little gooier. So let's go ahead and taste this. It's a natural rind, it's a bloomy rind. So you're more than welcome to eat the rind. Ooh, it smells like good goat cheese. It's chalky, little hay, citrus. Wow. So, very traditional. It has this, as you're chewing, has this great creaminess to it. It has a little bit of the goat tang, a little bit of that citrusiness to it. But this is outstanding. So you can eat this as a snack, which is what I would do with a little bread and crackers. But this would be awesome in salads. Roast a little, if you roasted some beets or something, this would be fantastic with roasted beets. If you wanted to make some sort of goat cheese torte, this would be fantastic to use for that as well. But really fantastic. It is the only non-sheep milk cheese we're going to do, and it's a fantastic one. So enjoy it however you want. Use it in recipes, use it in salads, or just kind of snack on it. And yeah, enjoy. All right, 3 of our next 4 cheeses are all coming from Extremadura. They're actually coming from the same producer in Extremadura, Finca Pasqualete. So I'll talk more about them in a second. But Extremadura is kind of really a magical place. It's full of wildlife preserves, parks, mountains, lakes. It's full of Roman ruins and castles. It's really a beautiful area and very little well-known by travelers and tourists in the U.S., but incredible. It's also where the very famous Iberico ham comes from. If you can imagine a ham that actually tastes better than Prosciutto di Parma, Iberico is one of them. It's the black-hoofed pigs that feed on acorns and fatten themselves up and produces ham that is just out of this world, as good as advertised. It's also anywhere from about $100 to $250 a pound, depending upon who the producer is and where it's aged. But the famous Iberico ham comes from Extremadura, as well as some of the best sheep milk cheeses. So we're really going to do a deep dive into sheep milk cheeses here. We had a goat cheese, our last cheese there from Bierzo. And now we're going to Extremadura and really going to do some in-depth stuff with sheep milk cheeses. So we're going to start with, again, and 3 of the next 4 cheeses are going to be by Finca Pasqualete. This is the Cumbre de Trujillo. Now, I follow Finca Pasqualete on Instagram. It's a cheese maker, cheese dairy that I discovered Only a couple years ago, when I was looking desperately to bring Torta del Caesar into the store into Iowa and couldn't find any, and through a great distributor we use, we're able to come across Finca de Pasqualate. And up until this week, actually, had only carried the Torta del Caesar, and even that's been just occasional because it's kind of harder to get in, especially since the pandemic. But we've brought in a couple other cheeses, and they're outstanding. The history of Finca Pasqualate is fairly interesting. It's the land is controlled. I'm going to read this because I'm never going to say this correct, but or correctly. It was started by a U.S. spy during World War II, a CIA agent in World War II, was in Spain. She stayed in Spain after World War II and married a gentleman, and fell in love and married a gentleman named Luis de Figueroa y Perez de Guzman el Bueno, or simply the Count of Romanones. So the Count of Romanones was obviously, as a count would be, a pretty extensive landowner in various parts of Spain, but had a large swath of land in Extremadura. And the former CIA agent, who would become eventually the Countess of Romanones, fell in love with Extremadura, fell in love with the land, and really saw all the amazing things going on there in terms of, Iberico ham making, but also cheese making and things of that nature, and decided to use the land as what she would say was meant to be used for, to raise sheep and produce amazing cheese. So the first cheese we're going to have from Finca Pasqualate is the Trujillo. The Trujillo, Cumbre de Trujillo, is a young sheep milk cheese. So it's only aged about 45 days. I think if you want to compare it to a cheese you might have had elsewhere, I think like Pecorino Fresco from Italy. So a young Pecorino. You kind of see it's a little yellowish coming off the light in here, but when you get the cheese at home, obviously you can look at it, but it's like a nice ivory white paste, a little bit of holes in it. It is semi-firm. It's a natural rind. I wouldn't eat the rind though, it's pretty bitter. And it looks like a young sheep milk cheese. Smells really buttery. All right. So, taste-wise, like there's a body to it and unctuousness to it, but mild. It has a really beautiful, like just fresh curd, creamy flavor to it, and it just kind of spreads over your palate. It's really beautiful. So think of like young Pecorino, if people are familiar with Asciugarate, like a younger version of Asciugarate maybe. And it has even texturally that kind of almost curd feel to it. It's a cheese I could just eat all day. It'd be really good if you drizzle a little honey over it maybe, a little bit of fruit, a little piece of ham, you'd be in heaven. It melts really well. So if you wanted to melt this on something, might be a bit much to melt it on a sandwich, but this is a great melting cheese as well. So Finca Pasqualate, our first sheep milk cheese, pretty much essentially a fresco or joven, a young 45-day aged Cumbre de Trujillo. Yeah, enjoy, and we'll get to our second sheep milk cheese here in just a sec. So our second cheese, or second sheep milk cheese, excuse me, third cheese overall, also from Finca Pasqualete. This is their Pasqualino cheese. So remember, we're still doing the cheeses of the Count and Countess of Romanones. The Countess of Romanones, the ex-CIA agent. I can tell you her real name, but then I would have to kill you. Now, the Pasqualino is similar in appearance to the Trujillo. The rind is a little different. The rind is also going to give you just a slight shot of ammonia when you open it. The white bloom is perfectly normal. You know, don't be afraid of mold on your cheese, especially on the rinds. Your greens and your blues and even your reds can just kind of just be usually brushed off, where you cut a small chunk off where the mold is, and underneath is still fantastic cheese. But it's actually a pretty clean and natural rind, but it does have like a white bloom and does smell a little of ammonia, but it's a very natural for this type of cheese in terms of how it's aged. And it's beautiful. It's got an ivory white paste like the Trujillo did, and still has, you know, little holes dotted throughout the cheese. Unlike the Trujillo, we're talking about, so like the Trujillo, talking about sheep milk cheese, actually the same breeds of sheep. But unlike the Trujillo, this is aged for 3 months, about 90 days, as opposed to just 45 days at the Trujillo. So this is more of an aged, slightly more aged, I should say, sheep milk cheeses. Sheep milk cheeses can age for as long as you want them to, 12 months, a year, 3 years. So on the nose, you could smell definitely a little more complex, where the Trujillo had almost like a fresh curd, buttery, creamy feel. I get some of that here too, but I get a little more of a mustiness, a little more kind of vanilla caramel note. Let's give it a try. Wow. All right, so that was awesome. This is what you're going to do. You're going to be chewing this, the Pasqualate. So this is the Pasqualino from Finca Pasqualate. This is the Pasqualino cheese, 3 months. You're going to chew it, and at first you're going to be like, well, this is kind of the Trujillo. It's semi-soft, semi-firm, I should say. A little buttery, a little creamy. And you're going to keep chewing, and then an explosion of flavor is going to happen. Vanilla, caramel, toffee, honey. It almost has this kind of real nice, like violet. It's awesome. There's nothing I consume that makes me more happy than cheese. Not even wine or bourbon. Cheese just makes me so happy. And when you get a cheese like this, that kind of sneaks up on you, surprises you, and just kind of bowls you over with its complexity and layers of flavor, it is amazing. So while the Trujillo was a beautiful cheese, young sheep milk cheese, this is just on another level in terms of flavor and complexity. And they're designed that way. The Trujillo is made to be fresh, easy eating, good melter, have a little with, honey and some fruit, and you're in a little piece of heaven. The Pasqualino kind of makes you think a little bit, and just, it's heavenly. All right, so I'm gonna head to our next cheese. We're gonna step away from Extremadura for a single cheese, and we're actually gonna go to Segovia, which is a wonderful city in Spain, huge Roman aqueduct, great food, beautiful old medieval city. And so there's a small yogurt producer, just a small yogurt producer outside of Segovia that makes incredible cheese. So we're gonna do that one next. All right, so our fourth cheese is from like a tiny yogurt and cheese making plant factory. I don't even know what you call it. It's so small. Right outside of Segovia, called Montecio. So they make 3 different cheeses at Montecio. This is their Montecio Red. Why is it called red? Because they dust it with Pimenton La Vera. This camera does us no justice, but this is a gorgeous, gorgeous cheese. So Pimenton de la Vera, think paprika, but this is not the paprika you buy at Hy-Vee or even the Co-op. Man, this is just beautiful. I can't get over how beautiful. And that the pimenton that this is dusted with, as I keep shoving this in the camera's face, explodes out of the packaging, and you get a really good whiff of the pimenton. Now, again, and this is, man, it's gorgeous. You'll notice the paste is beautiful. I got a little pimenton on the paste. I apologize. Very unprofessional of me. But you'll notice that the rind is studded with some green mold. It's fine. Don't worry about it. You're not going to eat it anyway. Or eat it. It's not going to make you sick. You can rub it off if it really offends you that much, but I think it makes the cheese even a little prettier. But it has like a really like a beautiful, it's like a color you'd find on like an old house in Segovia or something. So this is sheep milk cheese as well. So we're continuing our exploration of sheep milk cheese. You will not be tired of sheep milk cheese when you finish these. You're just gonna want more sheep milk cheese. This particular cheese is made from the milk comes from a very ancient breed of sheep called the Chura, or like 85 or 90% of the milk comes from the Chura sheep. It's like literally thousands of years old. And then Asaf, which is a fairly well-known sheep breed for cheese making. So the paste itself, as I can't pull myself away from the cheese, is again, it's somewhat similar in texture to the 2 Finco Pasqualetti cheeses we had. A kind of white paste, and then kind of gets discolored towards the rind, which makes a lot of sense because the rind has been colored and altered with the pimenton. This is a raw milk cheese. It's also a Thistle-Rennet cheese. This will be one of 2 Thistle-Rennet cheeses we have. The Tortilla Caesar, which we'll get to next, is also Thistle-Rennet. So, you know, I would say taste the cheese, see if you notice any difference, see if you get any of that slight bitterness I talked about before with Thistle-Rennet cheeses. But whether we really taste it or whether we taste it because we read about Thistle-Rennet cheese or have this this whole idea about the power of suggestion is always a question. But let's try this. All right, so another cheese you need to let sit with you, like the Pasqualino. Chew it, let it sit. It's fruity, a little sweet, nice saltiness to it, and that pimenton definitely gives it smokiness. It's subtle at first, but then on the finish, it's just this undercurrent of smoky, beautiful pimenton. Yeah, that's incredible. That's incredible. And I had to do a Spanish cheese that's covered in pimenton. The Spanish love to sprinkle pimenton, various pimentons on everything, including their cheeses. And so it wouldn't be a proper sheep milk or Spanish cheese tasting without doing a cheese that's covered in pimenton. So this is, again, the Montecio Red, tiny little cheese and yogurt making place outside of Segovia, Spain. It's delicious. I don't even know. This would be a good melting cheese as well. This would probably be delicious on a burger. Be one heck of a burger though, but this is just great to snack on by itself. The flavors and complexity of this one, just like the Pasqualino before it, really come out as you kind of let the cheese just kind of sit on your palate and kind of chew the cheese. And yeah, I'm gonna enjoy this before we get to our next cheese. See you in a second. All right, so our second to last cheese is the Torta del Caesar. All right, so this is actually, hold on, also from Finca Pasqualete. So we've done like a little mini Finca Pasqualete tasting. Should have tried to get the Countess on Zoom, see if they would do an online tasting for us. Maybe in the future. But this is a red torta. So Torta del Caesars are, traditional Torta del Caesars are 2 or 3 times the size. So this is their mini torta. It's like the perfect serving size. So again, we're talking about raw. This is a raw sheep milk cheese. This is thistle rennet again. The other 2 Finca Pasqualete cheeses we tried were not thistle rennet cheeses. They were animal rennet for both, I believe. The Mondoteo that we tried, the red with the Pimentone on it, was a thistle rennet cheese. So we have actually tried 2 thistle rennet sheep milk cheeses. You know, we're going through a lot of sheep milk cheese here. Again, traditionally, Spain is known for their sheep milk cheeses. A lot of it has to do with tradition, rugged landscapes, a lot of shepherds. Sheep do well there. And again, they do make cow and goat milk cheeses, some excellent ones, a lot of excellent ones, but kind of wanted to feature just the great sheep milk cheeses of Spain. And this is probably, the Torta del Caesar is probably my favorite sheep milk cheese in the world. Sheep, by the way, and we're gonna do a sheep milk versus cow milk versus goat milk video club for one of these down the road, and we'll get into it more later. But the type of milk you use does play a huge difference in the taste and texture of the cheese. Sheep milk is filled with a lot more solids than cow's milk and goat's milk. And what do we mean by solids? Well, it has, for example, a lot more protein. Actually 70%, give or take, depending upon the breed of cow, depending upon the breed of sheep. Sheep milk in general has about 70% more protein than cow's milk or goat's milk. Cow and goat are pretty similar. There are some differences. We'll get into that when we do that class. And so 70% more protein in sheep milk compared to goat or cow milk. And twice as much fat, but we kind of sweep that under the rug a little bit. And what that means is the ratio of amount of milk it takes to cheese that you get is a lot higher for sheep. So, or a lot less, I should say, I guess. So for example, you know, it takes about 4 pounds of sheep milk to make 1 pound of cheese. Whereas it'll take 8 to 10 pounds of cow milk to make 1 pound of cheese. So you get a lot more cheese to milk from a sheep than you do from a cow. So why is sheep milk cheese rarer, a lot rarer than cow milk or goat milk cheese? If there's this fantastic ratio of, man, I only need 4 pounds of milk to get 1 pound of cheese versus double to 2.5 times that for cows. Well, and even goats. Unfortunately, the sheep lacks the sheer volume of milking capacity that a cow does. So, whereas it takes more milk for a cow to produce as much cheese via sheep milk one-on-one, that ratio skews a great deal more when in a lactation cycle, a cow will produce tens, sometimes, depending upon the breed, on tens of thousands of gallons of milk in a single lactation cycle. So 15, 16 to sometimes 30,000 pounds of milk in a lactation cycle for a cow. There are some breeds of sheep that will only produce, actually there's some breeds of sheep that produce even less than this, but 50 to 60 gallons of milk in a lactation cycle. So the volume of milk you get out of a cow is astronomically higher. So a lot of sheep milk cheese can be pretty expensive compared to, well, sheep milk cheese is harder to work with from the sense that, from a monetary standpoint, economy of the business of making cheese, for a lot of people, it doesn't make sense. There's not a lot of sheep milk cheese producers in the United States. And it's for that reason. Because monetarily, it doesn't make a lot of sense. There are a fair amount of sheep milk cheese producers. Some dairies do produce sheep milk cheese, but that's not usually solely their one cheese that they produce. There are a few. There are exceptions. There's actually a great one in the Missouri, in the Midwest. They do Woolly Rind. The name will come to me. I can't believe I can't think of their name. Eureka out in California is a great sheep milk cheese made by Central Coast Creamery. But Central Coast Creamery also does a lot of cow milk cheeses as well. So there are people who produce sheep milk cheeses in the US, but most dairies, except for a small handful, are not solely sheep milk cheese producers because it's not economically viable, because sheep, although they have a lot more solids and can produce more cheese per gallon, have such small volumes of milk production. So the torta del Caesar, how do you eat this thing? Do you cut it? No, don't cut it like a normal cheese. You cut it like you do people who are familiar with like Harbison or Winnemere. You just kind of cut the top off. That's beautiful. Look how creamy that is. And then I ate this thing. I eat it like a pudding cup, a Jello cup. Oh. It's hard to describe what torta del Caesar tastes like. It's salty, it's briny, like olives almost. It has this salty, briny olive flavor to it. And then woodsy, earthy, mustardy. Of course, it's creamy, but it's just so good and it's so complex. A little meaty, get meatiness on the finish to it. I love this cheese. I can eat this cheese every day, but I've gained more than enough weight during the pandemic where I probably shouldn't. Now, you don't have to eat it like a pudding cup, obviously. It's great over toasted bread. It's great on crackers. It is a great little cheese to share with 2 to 4 people and just kind of cut it open, spread it on something. It actually goes pretty well. I had some of this and some grilled artichokes the other night, and it was delicious with the grilled artichoke. Went perfectly, actually. But yeah, it's just that the brininess of it is just so unique, and to me, so delicious. If you're not an olive person, if you're not like an earthy cheese person, and not funky, it's not. That's the thing. It's not like those wash rind Lemberger type super funky cheeses. It's so uniquely its own cheese, and this is the cheese where you can really pick out a little bit of that thistle rennet. There is a little bit of bitterness to it as well. I'm still tasting it. I still get like a mustardy feel to it, but it's just delicious. I hope you enjoy, some of you enjoy the torta del Caesar as much as I do. It's probably not for everybody. Some people might call it an acquired taste, but it's worth trying at least once in your life. It's a very rare cheese. It's a protected cheese. You know, there was a time where torta del Caesar, and which makes what the Count and Countess of Romanone is doing so important, is the cheese almost became extinct. There were people for a while, you know, in the 20th century, especially in the 1900s, where the cheese almost died off, where there were so few producers making this cheese that it became a worldwide protected cheese. And some people in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s took on the task of taking these traditional torta recipes and kind of revitalizing it, and thankfully so. It would be much missed and much shame if this cheese just kind of went the way of the dodo. So enjoy it. If you're going to pair this with the wine, I would do like a lighter body Garnacha maybe, or slightly fruitier Rioja. Enjoy. We got one more cheese to go, and then a little surprise for you. So the last cheese you're going to do, or you're going to get to taste at least, is the Manchego 3-month-old. I went with all these crazy Spanish cheeses here. Why would you put Manchego in? Well, you kind of got to have a Manchego. It is the national cheese of Spain, but it's a unique cheese. It's not the Manchegos we usually carry in the store. It's actually a beautiful raw milk Manchego, which has quite a bit of flavor. It's got a little bit of nuttiness to it, a little bit of nice pepperiness, really nice fruitiness to it. Very complex. You're gonna enjoy. Everyone likes Manchego. I can't imagine you not liking this one. This one's got a little more flavor, a little more traditional. Manchego comes from that area, the high plains of Spain, in particular La Mancha, that very kind of rough and tumble area. And it's made from Manchega sheep, and you typically come in 3-month-old, 6-month-old, or 12-month-old. And the 3-month-olds tend to be kind of a little creamier, fresher, not creamy in the sense of texture, but just, you know, it's still firm, but just kind of has a lighter, creamier taste. And then as you go along in age, the flavors get a lot more in depth, and you tend to get a little more peppery spice. They're grassy. The unique rind, almost all Manchego rinds are now plastic. Don't eat the rinds on the Manchegos. There are still a few people who do natural rinds, a few producers do natural rinds on Manchego, but this will not be one of them. And I've only seen it once or twice in the US. There's just not much. But the unique kind of, not shape, but patterns in the rind come from the traditional grass. Manchegos used to be aged in grass, in weaved grass baskets. And that's what will kind of give them the unique pattern on the rind. So this Manchego is delicious. It'll be a little different than the Manchegos you've had before, I'm sure. But I'm sure you're going to love the Manchego, as well as a lot of these other cheeses. Now, the last thing you're going to get, and you're getting a ton of cheeses here, so they're going to be a little smaller in your package than other cheese-themed clubs we've done in the past, just because there's so many. Usually they're between 3 and 5 cheeses. This time you're getting, I think, like 6. So it's funny, I went the opposite way with the wine and cheese this month. I did only 2 wines for each club. Oh, they're incredible wines. I went like 6 cheeses. I went berserk. But I'm sure you'll enjoy it. And then the last little treat I have for you is the Monteraz Jamón de Cebo de Campo Ibérico. So this is the Iberico ham. This is ham that's actually raised on a pasture. So these are not the Pelota pigs. These are not the pigs that are kind of running free, feeding on acorns. But these are really well-treated pigs, and this is a traditional Iberico ham, and it is outstanding. You will not be getting the whole package. I'm gonna open up a package and probably put, I don't know yet, I gotta weigh them out a little bit, but 2 to 4 pieces. So if you get a little package in your cheese box and you're like, why do I only have 2 to 4 really small pieces of ham? Because it's Iberico ham, and like the Monterey stuff that I just showed you here is like $110 a pound. So I'm not trying to kind of, be cheap with my ham giving, but this is kind of some of the highest quality stuff out there in the world. And if you've not had Iberico ham before, you deserve this, to try this. I tried this particular brand, Monterey's. We do 2 hams from them. We do have the Iberico ham in the store that's pre-packed, and now we have the Cibo in this kind of round package. And it was absolutely delicious. It melts in your mouth, and it's got this oiliness to it and this wonderful earthy flavor to it that's just really not replicated, in my opinion, by any other ham in the world. So enjoy the cheeses, enjoy the last cheese, the Manchego especially, even though I didn't get to eat it here. I'll have some when it comes in on Tuesday, and especially enjoy the ham. Savor it, and if you like it, we do sell it here in the store in 2-ounce packages. That's our show for today. Please leave any comments. Let me know what you think about the cheeses. This was the most unique cheese video and cheese tasting we've done so far with the Cheese Club. So I would love feedback, whether you loved the cheese, whether you didn't like the cheese, whether some of it was too weird for you. And none of them are that weird, but I'd love to get your feedback either in the comments below, or when you come into the store, say hello and tell me what's up with the cheese. Enjoy. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you soon.